but quite Solomonic, I would say. Seems to me that the don't ask, don't tell policy is truly egregious for a country with our heritage of ability to grow and learn, and that it poses a special opportunity to flip the debate a little bit out of a kind of special pleading tone, please take care of our own, into a discussion of sexuality in general. Because the military has, by the very nature of its task, the tremendous intimacy of the service, the command and control nature of the supervision that occurs, has a tremendously difficult time getting heterosexuality properly managed too. And we periodically hear of the failures. But by gosh, they're doing it. You know, there are female cadets at the military academies, women serve throughout the service. So it seems to me there's an interesting opportunity to say sexuality manifests itself in many ways, is always a challenge to understand and manage, but let's in the military at least cast this in a very broad way and see our issues as really a subset of a larger set of issues of sexuality in the military. Do you think that's an opportunity?
Well, I think what you're talking about does fall under the guise of what is often put out there as a challenge, which is the implementation part of this. And of course, there are all sorts of hurdles that are raised when we begin to engage in, how this policy might get implemented from various places within the military. I think I understand what you're saying, but with regard to, do I think that is a dialogue or a direction that we should take this conversation? I think that I think we may get to that point, as if and when we start to debate various matters that have to do with implementing the policy or engaging with military leadership on that. But I think the more compelling and the more winning messages right now for our community, and what you're going to see more of, a great deal more of, is really the individual people who simply want to or wanted to serve telling their own stories. I mean, that is, as I was alluding to in my talk, I think the most powerful thing that we can do. One of the most heroic people that I've met in this work is a young man named Eric Alva, who lives in San Antonio, Texas, who was the first Marine injured in the Iraq War. He lost his leg, and he came home and came back to San Antonio as an American hero, and then he came out. And I talk about how those sort of abstract ideas and real life stories really force people to resolve their thinking. I think those are the sorts of things, those stories and those individuals are what we are going to have at the forefront of this debate, at least in the foreseeable future.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for being here today. You mentioned that in the 80s, we spent a lot of time fighting to keep people alive and dealing with the AIDS epidemic. And here we are, so many years later, and HIV/AIDS is still a devastating issue in our community, in the LGBT community. Can you shed some light on some of the work that HRC is doing on those fronts?
Well, that is actually, I think, one of the real bright spots of this new administration is to work with them and to see the way in which they are addressing the real issues that need to be addressed after 8 years of just being, completely out in the cold. I mean, ironically, when I talked about the 80s and no one doing anything else until the advent and the growth of organizations that were doing both services and advocacy, so that others in the movement were able to advance a more expansive agenda, we really, HRC and everybody else in the movement over the years of the Bush administration continued to be in a defensive mode, continued to have to do things that none of us ever thought we would have to do, like getting the money for Ryan White, and things that none of us thought we were going to have to do. So we have been very much in a defensive mode up until this new administration. Now, I was at the White House about 6 weeks ago listening to the CDC talk about how they're going to, in a much more comprehensive way, rededicate themselves to fighting the domestic AIDS crisis, and talk about the work that they're doing in communities of color and among gay and bisexual men. And I'll tell you, they've never been talked like that in the White House before. So it's always important to note that just recently we as a movement and this administration have been able to turn to a more proactive approach to what we're doing in this epidemic.
Joe, given what you've mentioned today and the behind-the-scenes conversations that you're having with the White House and what we understand is the fickle nature of the United States Senate, what do you think is realistic? And without giving away the entire battle plan, and I understand you don't want to give away the whole strategy, but what can we realistically expect given that the rat race of re-election begins pretty soon? We have a president who is a fierce advocate for LGBT rights, and yet we haven't accomplished a whole lot that's substantive yet. How do you see the next 1, 2, 3.5 years of this administration shaping up?
Well, one thing that I do think is important to note is that this administration has taken an awful lot longer than they thought they were going to do to put people in jobs. I as many people I'm sure thought, 8 years of one government, and it must be take 2 weeks and we'll have a whole new government, and hundreds of thousands of new people with a different mindset doing different things. That shouldn't take long, and that's taken a lot longer than we thought and than they thought. So we gave this administration a number of, for instance, policy changes we would like them to make with regard to LGBT government workers. They haven't implemented them yet, but they hired a guy named John Barry to be the director of the Office of Personnel Management, the highest ranking gay person ever appointed to anything in government. So I'm thrilled they took the time to appoint John Barry, and I'm thrilled to spend the next 4 years working with him on these things, as opposed to somebody else we might have had to work with. Eric Holder will be an unbelievably supportive LGBT Attorney General. Kathleen Sebelius, a wonderfully supportive Secretary of Health and Human Services. So that has taken longer than we thought. But now that these people are in place, will she, under her leadership, bring down the ban on HIV-positive people coming into this country? Yes, within the coming months. And will we begin to implement some of those executive orders? Yes, we will. But legislatively, you're right. The Senate is a complicated terrain because any one person, as those of you who are here from Senator Sherrod Brown's office know, and look, there's no greater hero than Sherrod Brown. He is out there every day slugging away for us, but one senator can derail the whole train. So the tactics that you have to use to move something through the Senate are more complicated, and that's what we're dealing with right now on hate crimes. Having said that, I fully expect that we'll move hate crimes through and the president will sign it, that we'll move an employment non-discrimination bill, that we will overturn Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And then what I think we really have the ability to do at the federal level is to continue to close that economic gap that exists in the absence of marriage equality. So a couple of years ago, as the pension protection bill went through, we threw a provision into it that said same-sex couples can now leave one another your 401k or your pension tax-free and penalty-free. We put the authors of that bill thought was a small provision, we thought was a very big deal, into something much bigger that was moving, and we got it done. So whether it's the elimination of taxes on domestic partner benefits or any range of same-sex benefits, either on the tax front or the health care front, that we can get through in a bigger tax bill or a bigger health care bill, we will do. And of course, this president, will sign those things into law, as opposed to, as President Bush did when we attempted to put the hate crimes bill on the Department of Defense authorization bill last time around as a way to sidestep that veto threat. As a way to sidestep him, he issued a veto threat on that bill as well.